From London, I'm Rochelle Travers, and this is The Standard. The campaigns for the general election are well and truly underway.
I know there are countless people who haven't decided how they'll vote in this election. They're fed up with the failure, the chaos and the division of the Tories, but they still have questions about us. Has Labour changed enough? Do I trust them with my money, our borders, our security? My answer is yes, you can, because I've changed this party permanently.
Sir Keir Starmer there, who didn't exactly have a restful bank holiday weekend as he hit the campaign trail. Yesterday, he delivered his first major speech of the general election, in which he promised to end what he called Tory chaos and protect the country's national security. Sir Keir also found time to give an exclusive interview to The Standard, in which the Labour leader vowed to end the bashing of London, and instead get more homes built at speed in the capital if he becomes Prime Minister. Our political editor, Cecil, was the man who sat down with the hopeful PM in waiting to find out what his plans are for the country and for London. Nick, you sat down with Sir Keir Starmer for an exclusive interview for The Standard. Were you impressed with the promises he's making?
Yes, well, so far Labour have been quite short on promises and on what they would do if they get into government. Sir Keir Starmer gave a bit more detail on housing to the Evening Standard. The key to what he was saying was that if Labour gets into power, it will work very closely with the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, to try to solve the capital's housing crisis. Now, at the moment, the Conservative government often are at odds with the London Mayor, so that may be over housing, that may be over funding for transport or crime. So there's quite a fraught relationship between City Hall and Whitehall, and that means that London doesn't always get the best that it could get. So what Sir Keir is saying is that if you get a Labour government, it will work very closely, or in his words, hand in glove with a Labour mayor to deal with issues like housing. What he is specifically pledging is that he would ensure that there are more homes built at speed in the capital if there is a Labour government. What he's not promising is any huge amount of new money. There's a bit more detail he's giving on improving the planning rules, but he's not suggesting that the problem can be solved by a huge extra investment. But what he does say is that he would have a better working relationship with Mr. Khan, and he thinks that will make a difference.
Starmer has vowed to end the bashing of London. What does he mean by this, and what are his plans exactly?
Well, a number of ministers and other senior Tories now and then take a pop at London, a bit of anti-London rhetoric, which they seem to think may help them win votes in the former Red Wall in the North and the Midlands, or at least keep hold of the Labour voters who turned to the Conservatives in 2019. So Keir Starmer is saying this anti-London rhetoric, this London bashing in his words, he says it is short-sighted, counterproductive, and a divisive way to look at politics. He also makes the very good point that London, while it is a very wealthy city in many ways, also has pockets of extreme poverty. So to try and portray London as just as one hugely wealthy area of the country, it's just not right.
What were some of the other key points you made during your conversation?
One factor holding back London's economy is a lack of workers in the hospitality sector. And a number of business chiefs in this area are saying that they need workers urgently. And one way to do that would be to relax the immigration rules to get in more workers from overseas, as has happened previously. Sir Keir didn't go down this route. He basically said that what the problem is that there's a lack of a skills strategy in Britain, and that basically people already in the country should be trained up to do these jobs. I also asked him about Labour's green economy plan. And this is quite striking in the way that he has dealt with this issue compared to what Sadiq Khan did on the expansion of the ultra-low emission zone to outer London. So Keir has come under quite heavy criticism from Tory MPs and some other people over his decision to have a £28 billion green economy plan and then to water it down in many people's eyes. The Tories argued that it would mean people having to pay too much money to go green, and so Labour, facing heavy criticism over it, eventually certainly appeared to backtrack. And the one of issue which was also raised, which may interest football fans. So Keir Starmer is a big Arsenal fan and plays football himself. And with the Euro 2024 tournament coming up, he was asked who should play the number 10 role for England. And he firmly backed Phil Foden over Jude Bellingham, playing in that crucial attacking midfield position.
What other pledges do you think Sir Keir Starmer and Labour should make so they can win the next general election?
Well, the whole point of Labour's strategy is to be risk averse. They are 20 points ahead in the polls. They don't need to take any big gambles, unlike the Tories, who need to come up with some game changers. So I expect that when all parties announce their manifestos, we'll see some more pledges and a bit more details on what they're planning. It looks very much like Sir Keir is heading for number 10, provided he doesn't slip up. Whereas Rishi Sunak, he's got to somehow reverse the polls in a way that's never been done before. Either the polls are wrong, or he's got to have a historic change around in the next few weeks to get another term in office. So expect more Labour playing it safe and the Tories taking bigger and bigger risks to try and get some kind of momentum, get voters to listen to them and change their minds at the last minute.
Let's go to the ads. Coming up in part 2, our courts correspondent Tristan Kirk on the latest from the Wagatha Christie saga.
The most high-profile case of such limited importance in British legal history.
The Standard Podcast will be back in just a moment. Welcome back. It was the case that gripped the country, Wagatha Christie.
Someone on my personal account was informing the Sun newspaper of my private posts and stories. I thought, I'm going to do something about it.
A clip there from the trailer of Disney Plus's Colleen Rooney, The Real Wagatha Christie Story. Now, you might have thought that the infamous case had completely come to an end when the High Court ruled in Colleen Rooney's favour back in July 2022. But today, there's a new update to this saga. Joining me now is Tristan Kirk, the Standard's courts correspondent. Tristan, for those who aren't aware, can you just explain the Wagatha Christie case and what the final ruling was?
I can. It was a case involving Colleen Rooney and Rebecca Vardy, probably the most high-profile case of such limited importance in British legal history. Colleen Rooney thought that somebody was leaking stories about her to the press. She went on Instagram and posted about it and accused Rebecca Vardy of being the culprit. Vardy said, "Not me, Gov," and sued for defamation, for libel, and said that I've been wrongly accused and my reputation has been besmirched. Rooney fought the case and won, with a judge concluding that it was true that Rebecca Vardy was the one who had been leaking stories from Rooney's private Instagram account. And that was all in 2022, after a big High Court trial in which the two of them went head-to-head.
Now, many people listening might have thought that the Wagatha Christie saga was over, but there's another update to this story today, isn't there?
It is indeed. It's the case that keeps on giving. So at the end of the 2022 trial, Rebecca Vardy was told to pay £800,000 on account as a sort of an upfront payment towards costs, and then with the total bill of the whole legal case to either be agreed or to be assessed by a judge. And as it transpires, the costs of the case have not been agreed. And so it will be for a judge to decide what the total costs are and what it is reasonable for each side to end up paying. And so today is the first of two bouts over costs. Today they are fighting over costs that were run up by Rebecca Vardy before the trial actually took place. She was preparing for the trial. Her legal team were doing all kinds of things to do with disclosure and what kind of expert evidence was going to be, and whether Rebecca Vardy's agent was going to be substantially involved in the case, and put forward a costs bill of £320,000. Now, because of the way some of the pre-trial applications went, Colleen Rooney was told to pay 20% of that bill, but Rooney is disputing the amount of money that was actually shelled out or budgeted for by Rebecca Vardy. So here we are at the High Court again, with the two of them arguing over Rebecca Vardy's pre-trial costs bill. And they are going through it line by line, literally going over what meetings were held, what lawyers were involved, at what point, how much was spent, how many hours were spent preparing for a particular preliminary hearing in the case, and disputing whether that was reasonable or not.
Because Vardy lost the case back in July 2022, will she be expected to cover the majority of the costs?
Unfortunately, it's slightly more complicated than that. Rebecca Vardy lost the trial and has been told to cover 90% of Colleen Rooney's costs of the trial. But issues that are decided before the trial takes place are on a different basis, depending on who won or lost those particular hearings and what points were taken and whether they were accepted by the court. So today we're actually dealing with what Colleen Rooney has to pay in terms of Rebecca Vardy's costs. It'll all come into the final calculation, of course, as to how much money goes one way or the other. But at the moment we're talking about £320,000 worth of costs run up by Rebecca Vardy, and how much of that is reasonable, and then there'll be a proportion of that that Colleen Rooney will have to pay.
When can we expect a final ruling on this?
Well, there are actually rulings being made as we go along. That's how these kind of hearings go. We're not getting the thrills and spills of the original Wagatha Christie trial, of course. This is a costs hearing, and it's quite unusual for anybody, journalist or otherwise, to turn up and watch these kind of proceedings, because there simply isn't usually the interest. But because of the high-profile nature of the case, I've come down to listen where the money was spent. It's given some kind of an indication of how you end up running up a bill of £2 million or so on a libel trial over an Instagram post, and it gives that kind of insight into the case. So this morning we heard things like Rebecca Vardy's top barrister, the KC Hugh Tomlinson, was working on the case on Christmas Day. And they had lawyers working on it on Boxing Day, New Year's Day. They basically say they were all hands to the pump to get their case ready for this preliminary hearing. And so therefore lots and lots of hours were spent, lots of money was spent on really significantly high profile and expensive lawyers. And the judge is going through it bit by bit, deciding this was reasonable, this is excessive, and basically salami slicing the costs bills where he thinks appropriate. So, for example, they were looking at communication between Rebecca Vardy's legal team and her and other people, and there was 9.4 hours that had been billed for, and Colleen Rooney's team said that only 7.8 hours were reasonable, and the judge, I think, then came down and said that 8.8 hours was a reasonable amount to bill for. Now, I'm sorry if I've lost everyone's attention with that explanation, but that really is the minute detail that they're going to here. And so over the day and a half that they're looking at it, the judge is going to make different rulings at different points. And then at the end, there will presumably be a final total of how much costs were reasonably run up by Rebecca Vardy.
You can read more about these stories and others in the Standard newspaper or on our website, standard.co.uk. And that's it from this episode. This podcast is back tomorrow at 4 p.m.